May 17th, 1943. North Atlantic, 400 miles west of Brest. The night was black, no moon, no stars, only the sound of the sea breaking against steel. Inside U-502, the smell of diesel, sweat, and stale air filled every corner. The crew spoke in low murmurs as gauges flickered faintly in the dim red light. Kapitän-Leutnant Otto Kramer stood in the conning tower, binoculars pressed to his eyes. The Atlantic wind stung his face. His submarine had been hunting for a convoy for 3 days without success. "Surface patrols are increasing," his first officer muttered, glancing at the horizon. "The British must have doubled their aircraft coverage." Kramer grunted. "They can't see us at night. Not out here." For years that had been true. Under cover of darkness, the U-boats of Admiral Dönitz's Kriegsmarine ruled the Atlantic. Surfacing at night to recharge batteries, they stalked Allied convoys like wolves. Invisible, silent, deadly. But tonight felt different. At 01:43, the lookout spotted something strange in the sky. A faint shape, no lights, no engine glow. Kramer raised his binoculars. It was too dark to tell what it was. Probably just imagination, he told himself. But then, a blinding beam of white light exploded from above, slicing through the night like a blade. "A light! On us! On us!" shouted the lookout. Kramer's heart slammed in his chest. The entire sea around the U-boat was suddenly illuminated. Every rivet, every man visible in the ghostly glare. The men blinked and swore, frozen by the brilliance. "Alarm! Dive! Dive!" Kramer screamed. Sirens blared. The crew scrambled down the hatch as depth charges splashed into the water. The U-boat's bow tipped downward. Water surged past the conning tower as they plunged beneath the surface. The first explosion hit seconds later, a concussive thud that threw men off their feet. Inside the control room, gauges shattered. The lights flickered, dimmed, and steadied. "Depth 30 meters. Make it 60. Schnell!" Kramer shouted, gripping a pipe to stay upright. More explosions rocked the hull, each one closer than the last. The U-boat groaned, its steel skin flexing under the shock waves. Then, silence. For a long moment, no one moved. Only the soft hum of the motors and the creak of cooling metal filled the air. Kramer's hands trembled as he wiped sweat from his face. "How did they find us?" he whispered. "We were surfaced for only 2 minutes." In the darkness, his radio operator stared at the ceiling as if the answer might be written there. "It was no flare, Herr Kaleun," he said softly. "That light came from the sky. It found us. Above them, the hunter circled once more. A Royal Air Force Wellington bomber equipped with something the Germans could not yet comprehend. Airborne surface vessel radar and the new Lee light, a 24-inch searchlight mounted under the fuselage. In the cockpit, Flight Lieutenant Harold Lee, the device's namesake, watched the shadow of the U-boat vanish beneath the waves. "Mark that," he said calmly. "We've just lit the devil himself." For the first time in the war, radar had pierced the ocean's darkness, and deep below, the hunters of the Atlantic realized they were no longer invisible. The black magic in the sky, June 1943. Lorient submarine pens occupied France. The U-boat crews moved through the damp concrete tunnels in silence. Once proud, swaggering men, the gray wolves of the Atlantic, now carried themselves like ghosts. Word had spread through the pens. The British can see in the dark. Kapitän-Leutnant Otto Kramer, recently returned from his near-fatal patrol, sat across from Korvettenkapitän Heinrich Lehmann-Willenbrock, a veteran commander. The two men leaned over a mess table littered with coffee mugs, maps, and empty cigarette packs. "It's impossible," Kramer muttered. "They attacked at night. No moon, no flares. Their light found us as if the heavens themselves opened." "They're using something new," Lehman said grimly. "The engineers think it's a radar mounted on aircraft. It bounces waves off the water. When those waves hit steel..." He didn't finish the sentence. At the far end of the pen, engineers from U-Boat Command were fitting new equipment: METOX receivers, crude radar detectors meant to give warning of Allied transmissions. A young radio man demonstrated the device to gathered officers, twisting the dial until a faint beeping filled the room. "When you hear this signal, Herr Kaleun, you dive immediately. It means the enemy's radar has locked onto you." Kramer frowned. "And how far away are they when we hear it?" 50 kilometers, the man replied. "And how long before they're overhead?" 2 minutes. The officers exchanged dark looks. Meanwhile, across the channel in England, the Royal Air Force Coastal Command was expanding its reach. The scientists' war had turned in the Allies' favor. At Bawdsey Manor and Tresco, radar engineers like Edward Bowen and Taffy Bowen refined the ASV Mark III radar, operating at higher frequencies the Germans couldn't detect. And paired with the Lee light, a blinding 22 million candle power beam mounted beneath aircraft, they turned the night into day. Over warm beer and cold sandwiches in briefing huts, British crews practiced their new hunting routine. 1. Sweep the ocean with radar until a small pip appeared. 2. Approach silently under cover of darkness. 3. At 500 meters, switch on the light, drop depth charges, and vanish. "They call it the moment of revelation," said Flight Lieutenant Alan Holmes, running a finger along a map of the Bay of Biscay. "1 second, they're kings of the sea. The next, they're animals caught in the light." That summer, Coastal Command's Wellingtons, Liberators, and Sunderlands prowled the shipping lanes from dusk till dawn. The results were devastating. In June alone, 31 U-boats were sunk, more than in any previous month of the war. In Lorient, morale collapsed. Crews whispered about Die Schwarze Magie, the black magic. Some claimed the British had trained seabirds to follow U-boats, others that Allied aircraft could detect the warmth of human bodies through clouds. Kramer didn't believe in magic, but he couldn't deny what he'd seen: a light that found his submarine across miles of ocean, and death falling from the sky seconds later. One night, as he stood on the pier, watching another U-boat slip into the Atlantic, Lehman Willenbrock came to stand beside him. "You know," he said quietly, "we used to be the hunters." Kramer nodded. "Now, we're the hunted." From the darkness offshore came the faint echo of engines. Aircraft, British, maybe American, circling somewhere out beyond the horizon. The ocean no longer belonged to the wolves. The wolves in the light, July 24th, 1943. Mid-Atlantic Gap, 700 miles west of Ireland. Rain lashed against the conning tower of U-461, the wind howling over the black waves. The sea was wild, angry, the kind of weather that once favored the German submariners. Bad weather had always been their ally, their cloak. But not anymore. Kapitän Leutnant Otto Kramer gripped the periscope rail as water poured down his face. His submarine had been ordered to rendezvous with 2 others, U-462 and U-504, to refuel in mid-ocean. In the old days, they would have done it without fear. The Allies couldn't reach that far, and at night, they were invisible. Now, though, every shadow in the sky felt like an omen. "Surface radar contact," shouted the radio man below, panic in his voice. Bearing 185, range uncertain. Kramer froze. He'd been at sea long enough to know that tone. He turned to his watch officer. Dive? If we dive, the others can't refuel, the man replied. Command said stay surfaced. Kramer cursed under his breath. Scheisse, all ahead flank. Signal the others. Scatter. He barely got the words out before the night erupted. A spotlight flared above them, blinding white, impossibly bright, cutting through rain and spray as if the storm didn't exist. The lee light, the same cursed beam that had haunted every U-boat sailor's nightmares. Aircraft! Aircraft above! Someone screamed. The roar of engines drowned out the wind. From the clouds came the outline of a Wellington bomber diving hard, bomb bay doors open. Crash dive! Dive, dive, dive! Kramer bellowed. Men slid down the ladders, sealing the hatches as water poured through the vents. The U-boat tilted sharply, alarms blaring. At 30 meters, the first depth charges went off. Boom! 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 The hull groaned. Lights flickered. Pipes burst, spraying cold seawater across the control room. Pressure rising, depth 50 meters, flooding in the stern. Hold her steady, Kramer shouted. Level her out, schnell! The explosions rolled on. Closer, deeper, shaking the ship like a tin can. Then, silence. Only the hiss of escaping air and the groan of metal under strain. For 2 hours, the crew sat motionless, sweating, listening for the drone of engines above. None came. When Kramer finally gave the order to surface, the men climbed the ladders like ghosts. They broke through into a night that was eerily calm. The sea glowed faintly, oil slicks, debris, and, in the distance, fire. One of the other U-boats had been hit. Burning fuel danced on the water. Kramer looked through his binoculars. A dark shape, U-504, was breaking apart, flames licking its conning tower. Men were in the water, waving weakly, their cries carried by the wind. God in heaven, he whispered. No Allied ships were in sight. The bomber was long gone, but its work was done. By dawn, U-461 was alone. Kramer stood on the bridge, salt crusting his uniform, staring at the empty horizon. The North Atlantic had become a graveyard. Below deck, one of his younger sailors whispered to another, "They can see through the sea. It's not war anymore, it's witchcraft." Kramer heard him. He didn't correct the boy. He didn't believe in magic. But the feeling in his gut told him that whatever haunted them in the sky, whatever machine could find a steel ghost in the middle of the night, was something beyond human. He stared up into the low clouds and said quietly, "They've turned the ocean against us." From that day on, the U-boat crews called the Allied aircraft the Angels of Death. And with every passing night, those angels descended lower, carrying their radar, their lights, and their vengeance across the dark Atlantic. The Turning Tide. August 1943. Bay of Biscay, off the French coast. The dawn broke gray and heavy over the Atlantic, the waves slick with oil and blood. What had once been the hunting ground of the Kriegsmarine's U-boats was now an open graveyard. Burned wreckage bobbed in the surf, gulls circling overhead. Out of the haze, the battered U-461 limped toward France, the last survivor of its wolf pack. Salt crusted the conning tower. The deck gun was twisted, useless. Every man aboard was exhausted, hollow-eyed. They hadn't slept in 2 days. Kapitän Lieutenant Otto Kramer stood on the bridge, binoculars hanging loosely around his neck. His hands trembled as he lit a cigarette. The smell of diesel mixed with fear. "How much longer can we fight this way?" he muttered. Beside him, his first officer, Lieutenant Vogel, didn't answer. He was staring at the horizon, where, far ahead, a formation of Allied aircraft patrolled the dawn sky like hawks. The crew knew the pattern now. The British and Americans were everywhere: Sunderlands, Wellingtons, Liberators, all fitted with radar and armed with depth charges. They flew in long, overlapping patrols, closing the air gap that had once protected the U-boats. There was no safe place left. In London, Air Chief Marshal Sir John Slessor of Coastal Command read the latest reports and smiled grimly. In May alone, 41 U-boats had been destroyed. By summer's end, that number would double. For the first time, Allied convoys crossed the Atlantic with minimal losses. And it wasn't brute force that won the battle. It was science. From secret labs in Malvern and Washington, engineers had refined radar frequencies, fitted aircraft with ASVMK, through sets undetectable by the Germans' primitive METOX receivers. The U-boats were blind. The Allies, for the first time, could see everything. The hunters had become the hunted. Aboard U-461, the radio crackled to life. All U-boats, this is BDU command. Surface operations to cease until further notice. Remain submerged during night patrols. Air attacks too severe. Vogel turned to Kramer. We can't fight if we can't surface, he said bitterly. We can't move, can't hunt. We're trapped under the ocean. Kramer nodded slowly. We were never meant to live down there forever. He looked out at the horizon, where sunlight flickered over the waves, like the glint of 1,000 searchlights. Every glimmer reminded him of that first night, the white beam that had found him in the middle of the sea. The Lee light. It haunted his dreams still, the moment of illumination, when the darkness itself betrayed him. Behind them, an explosion echoed faintly. Another submarine caught surfacing too soon. The crew watched in silence as black smoke rose into the sky. Another one gone, whispered Vogel. Kramer exhaled slowly. By 1941, we were the kings of the ocean, he said. Now the ocean belongs to them. In England, the men who flew the night patrols called their mission the Black War. They never saw their enemies' faces, only the shapes of their prey, caught in the sudden glare of a searchlight before vanishing beneath the waves. For Flight Lieutenant Harold Lee, it was never about vengeance. It was about survival. They sent our boys to the bottom for 4 years, he said. It was time we sent light down there to find them. By the end of 1943, the Battle of the Atlantic was effectively won. Allied convoys reached Britain faster, supplies flowed freely again, and the stranglehold that had threatened to starve the island nation was broken. In Germany, Admiral Karl Dönitz looked over the casualty lists in disbelief. More than 70% of U-boat crews, 40,000 men, would never return. He called it the darkest chapter in naval history. But for the survivors like Kramer, it was simpler. Standing on the deck of his crippled submarine as it limped into Lorient, he looked up at the morning sky. And for the first time, he feared it. The heavens, once indifferent to the war below, now belonged to the machines that could see through night and cloud, through waves and steel. He whispered to himself, the sea used to hide us. Now, it betrays us. The invisible eyes of radar had changed warfare forever. No more darkness, no more safety, only light, bright, merciless, and inescapable.